What happens when a podcast as popular as The Joe Rogan Experience features guests who rub the audience the wrong way? While Joe Rogan's platform is celebrated for its diverse roster of guests and open-ended conversations, not every episode is a hit. Some interviews have left fans cringing, questioning Rogan's approach, or outright disappointed by the guests' behavior. From tech CEOs dodging tough questions to comedians delivering jokes that land flat and conspiracy theorists spiraling into incoherence, we're counting down the 10 most hated guests on Joe Rogan's podcast. Who left the audience rolling their eyes? Which guest turned what could have been a great episode into a total disaster? Let's find out. 1. Jack Dorsey, the episode that fell flat. Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter, now known as X, seemed like an ideal guest for the Joe Rogan Experience. At the time of his appearance, Twitter was at the center of numerous controversies, from debates about censorship and free speech to high-profile bans of controversial figures. Fans anticipated a hard-hitting interview where Rogan would dive into the mechanics of the platform, the decision-making process behind banning users, and the broader implications for freedom of expression. Unfortunately, the reality of the episode fell far short of those expectations. From the outset, it was clear that this wasn't going to be the grilling fans had hoped for. Rogan's approach to interviewing Dorsey was unusually soft. Rather than challenging the tech mogul on Twitter's handling of contentious issues, he asked general and uninspired questions, such as whether the platform had considered expanding the character limit. While the question might have been mildly interesting to some, it felt like a missed opportunity for the majority of listeners, who were eager to hear about the more significant topics shaping Twitter's role in modern society. The tone of the conversation didn't help either. Rogan and Dorsey shared a subdued dynamic that lacked the spark needed to engage the audience. Dorsey's responses often felt rehearsed and PR-friendly, offering little insight or depth. For example, when asked about censorship, Dorsey gave vague answers that skirted around specifics, leaving fans frustrated by the lack of accountability or transparency. Rogan, typically unafraid to press his guests for clarity, seemed to let these moments slide, further contributing to the episode's underwhelming reception. The backlash was swift and loud. Listeners took to social media to express their disappointment, accusing Rogan of giving Dorsey a free pass and failing to hold him accountable for Twitter's contentious decisions. Many even labeled the episode as one of JRE's most boring and frustrating interviews. The criticism was so widespread that Rogan issued a rare public apology, admitting that he hadn't prepared adequately for the episode and underestimated the audience's expectations. Despite the backlash, Dorsey later returned to the podcast alongside Twitter's then legal head Vijaya Gadde, in an attempt to address the criticism and dig deeper into the controversies. This follow-up episode fared better, but the damage from the initial interview lingered in the minds of JRE fans, cementing Dorsey's first appearance as one of the most hated episodes in the podcast's history. And just like that, we start our journey through the infamous guests of JRE. Speaking of divisive figures, let's move on to someone whose appearances have always sparked heated debates, whether for their ideas or their self-promotion. Enter Aubrey Marcus. 2. Aubrey Marcus, the self-help salesman. Aubrey Marcus, entrepreneur and founder of the fitness and wellness company Onnit, is no stranger to the Joe Rogan Experience. With his frequent appearances, Marcus has carved out a niche as the podcast's go-to guru for discussions on holistic health, self-improvement, and overcoming personal obstacles. However, not all fans of the show are on board with his approach. To many, Marcus represents the kind of guest who veers dangerously close to self-promotion, often leaving listeners skeptical of his true intentions. At first glance, Marcus's philosophy of blending physical fitness with spiritual and mental well-being seems like a perfect fit for JRE's audience. He speaks passionately about concepts like total human optimization and encourages listeners to embrace challenges as opportunities for growth. But where Marcus loses many fans is in his delivery. Critics argue that his appearances often feel like extended infomercials for his brand rather than genuine conversations. Whether he's promoting Onnit's line of supplements or sharing his personal life lessons, some listeners feel like they're being sold a product rather than gaining meaningful insights. One of the biggest critiques of Marcus's appearances is his tendency to contradict himself. In one episode, he might champion the idea of pushing through discomfort as the ultimate path to self-discovery, while in another, he emphasizes the importance of rest and balance. While these concepts aren't necessarily incompatible, his delivery often feels inconsistent, leaving some fans scratching their heads. A particularly polarizing moment came when Marcus discussed his open relationship practices, which he presented as a pathway to personal growth. While intriguing to some, others dismissed it as self-serving and unrelatable. Joe Rogan himself seems to have a soft spot for Marcus, often giving him the space to dive deep into his philosophies. But even Rogan's enthusiasm hasn't been enough to win over everyone. Online forums and comment sections are filled with debates about Marcus's authenticity, with some listeners praising his insights and others labeling him as a snake oil salesman. The divide is so strong that his episodes are often skipped entirely by fans who find his approach unpalatable. Still, Marcus's recurring presence on JRE speaks to his ability to resonate with at least part of the audience. While he may never escape the shadow of self-promotion, his episodes do spark conversations about what it means to live an optimized life. Love him or hate him, Marcus has cemented his place as one of the podcast's most divisive guests. As polarizing as Marcus is, he rarely lets emotions run high during his appearances. The same can't be said for the next guest, whose episode turned into a shouting match that left listeners both entertained and exhausted. Let's talk about Steven Crowder. 3. Steven Crowder. The debate that spiraled. Steven Crowder, a political commentator and comedian known for his conservative views, brought an entirely different kind of energy to the Joe Rogan experience. From the start of his appearance, it was clear that this episode was destined to be intense. Crowder's strong opinions clashed with Rogan's more laid-back approach, but the real fireworks came when the discussion shifted to marijuana legalization. Rogan, a longtime advocate for cannabis use, and Crowder, a vocal critic, found themselves on opposite ends of the debate. What started as a lively discussion quickly escalated into a full-blown argument. Crowder repeatedly interrupted Rogan to make his points, while Rogan fired back, frustrated by what he saw as Crowder's inability to engage in a balanced conversation. "Hold on, stop. No, you're talking too much," Rogan exclaimed, his tone growing sharper as the exchange continued. Adding fuel to the fire the two had been drinking during the episode, which only heightened the tension. The debate became less about the actual topic and more about who could dominate the conversation. At one point, Rogan accused Crowder of twisting statistics about marijuana and highway fatalities, a claim Crowder vehemently denied. The argument devolved into a shouting match that felt more like a verbal boxing match than a productive discussion. For some listeners, the chaos was entertaining, a raw and unscripted clash of personalities. But for many others, it was exhausting. The lack of civility and constant interruptions made it hard to follow the conversation, leading to widespread criticism of the episode. Fans took to social media to express their disappointment, with some accusing Crowder of being deliberately confrontational, and others blaming Rogan for losing control of the discussion. Despite the contentious nature of the episode, it served as a reminder of what makes JRE so unpredictable. The podcast's unscripted format allows for moments of genuine conflict, but it also risks spiraling into chaos when strong personalities collide. Crowder's appearance is a perfect example of this dynamic, a polarizing episode that left fans divided. From heated debates to outright awkwardness, the next guest brought a completely different kind of discomfort to the podcast. deadmau5, the enigmatic electronic music producer, managed to turn his episode into one of the most painfully awkward conversations in JRE history. Let's dive into what went wrong. 4. deadmau5, the awkward silence. When Joel Zimmerman, better known as deadmau5, appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience, fans of the electronic music producer were excited to hear him discuss his creative process, industry insights, and maybe even a few behind-the-scenes stories from his storied career. What they got instead was one of the most awkward episodes in JRE history. From the very beginning, it was clear that deadmau5 and Rogan didn't exactly click, and the result was a conversation that felt more like pulling teeth than an engaging dialogue. One of the biggest issues was the lack of chemistry between the two. Rogan, known for his ability to put guests at ease, struggled to find common ground with deadmau5. Whether discussing music, technology, or broader cultural topics, the flow of conversation repeatedly stalled, with deadmau5 offering short, clipped answers that left Rogan scrambling to keep things moving. For instance, when Rogan tried to delve into the role of technology in electronic music, deadmau5 responded with a curt, "Yeah, it's a tool, and little else." The silence that followed was deafening. The discomfort only grew when the topic shifted to recreational substances, a recurring theme on JRE. Rogan, who has spoken extensively about his experiences with cannabis and psychedelics, tried to explore deadmau5's views on the subject. However, the producer was quick to shut the conversation down, stating flatly, "I just don't want to go there." While it's perfectly valid for a guest to set boundaries, the abruptness of his response left Rogan visibly frustrated, and the audience feeling the tension. Even the presence of additional guests, such as comedian Russell Peters and JRE regular Eddie Bravo, couldn't save the episode. Their attempts to inject humor and energy into the discussion often felt misplaced, as deadmau5 remained detached and uninterested. The overall vibe of the episode was so off that some listeners speculated that deadmau5 simply didn't want to be there, which might explain his guarded and disengaged demeanor. The audience reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Fans of JRE and deadmau5 alike expressed disappointment, with many calling it one of the most unwatchable episodes in the podcast's history. What could have been an intriguing exploration of the electronic music world instead became a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview. After the episode, deadmau5 largely stayed quiet about the experience, and it's unlikely he'll be making a return to JRE anytime soon. The awkwardness of his appearance was a stark contrast to the fiery energy of other controversial guests, like the one we'll discuss next. Enter Mel Gibson, a Hollywood icon whose episode left fans scratching their heads for entirely different reasons. 5. Mel Gibson, a Hollywood icon, turned stem cell advocate. Mel Gibson's appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience was highly anticipated. As one of Hollywood's most iconic and controversial figures, Gibson was expected to deliver a captivating conversation filled with stories about his blockbuster films, his experiences in the entertainment industry, and his reflections on the controversies that have defined his career. Instead, listeners got an episode that was more of a science lecture than a Hollywood tell-all. From the outset, it was clear that Gibson wasn't there to discuss his acting career or his personal life. Instead, the focus of the episode was on stem cell research, a topic Gibson is deeply passionate about. Accompanied by Dr. Neil Reardon, a leading expert in regenerative medicine, Gibson spent the majority of the episode discussing the benefits and future potential of stem cell therapies. While the information was undoubtedly fascinating to those interested in medical science, it was far from what the average JRE listener expected from a guest of Gibson's stature. The problem wasn't the topic itself, but the way it dominated the conversation. Fans tuned in to hear about Gibson's experiences directing Braveheart or his thoughts on Hollywood's evolving landscape. Instead, they got a deep dive into the specifics of stem cell procedures, complete with technical jargon that left many feeling alienated. Rogan, who often thrives in scientific discussions, tried to balance the conversation by steering it back to Gibson's personal journey. But these attempts were few and far between. Another issue was the dynamic between Gibson and Rogan. While Gibson was articulate and passionate about the subject, he seemed less comfortable engaging in the casual, wide-ranging style of conversation that JRE is known for. His responses were often measured and serious, which contrasted sharply with Rogan's more laid-back approach. This mismatch in tone made the episode feel disjointed, leaving listeners yearning for the kind of candid, unfiltered storytelling that Gibson's career could have provided. The fan reaction was mixed at best. While some appreciated the episode's educational value, many felt it was a wasted opportunity. Comments flooded social media, with viewers expressing frustration over the lack of personal anecdotes and Hollywood insights. For a guest with such a storied career, Gibson's episode was seen as a letdown, more suited to a medical symposium than a podcast known for its entertaining and unpredictable discussions. Despite the criticism, Gibson's passion for stem cell research was undeniable, and the episode did shed light on an important topic. However, for JRE fans hoping for an unforgettable Hollywood interview, this episode fell short. Speaking of falling short, our next guest found himself at the center of one of JRE's most contentious debates, where tempers flared and the conversation took a sharp turn. Let's talk about Jamie Kleinstein. 6. Jamie Kleinstein. Heated arguments and uncomfortable moments. Jamie Kleinstein, a comedian known for his outspoken views on social issues, made an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience that quickly spiraled into one of the podcast's most contentious episodes. While JRE often thrives on passionate debates and differing viewpoints, Kleinstein's episode took an uncomfortable turn when the conversation shifted to a sensitive topic: whether sexual misconduct or murder is the worst crime. What started as a seemingly philosophical discussion quickly escalated into a heated exchange. Kleinstein argued that sexual misconduct could have a more profound and lasting impact on victims than murder, a stance that left Rogan visibly incredulous. The debate grew increasingly tense as both men dug in their heels. At one point, Rogan lost his patience entirely, raising his voice to declare, "Jamie, you're talking nonsense." The tone of the conversation shifted from a spirited debate to outright hostility, making it difficult for listeners to follow or enjoy the discussion. The tension wasn't helped by Kleinstein's argumentative style. He often interrupted Rogan to make his points, which only heightened the host's frustration. Rogan, known for his calm demeanor even in heated debates, seemed genuinely exasperated as the conversation went off the rails. The episode felt less like an exchange of ideas and more like a shouting match, leaving listeners cringing at the awkwardness of it all. For many fans, the episode crossed a line. The emotionally charged nature of the discussion made it uncomfortable to watch, and Kleinstein's unrelenting approach alienated a significant portion of the audience. Critics argued that his black-and-white perspective on complex issues didn't leave room for nuance, a hallmark of Rogan's best episodes. Social media lit up with negative feedback, with many branding the episode as one of the podcast's least enjoyable. Despite the backlash, the episode remains a stark example of the unpredictable nature of JRE. Kleinstein's fiery approach and willingness to challenge Rogan's views made for an intense, if polarizing, episode. However, for listeners who tune in for thought-provoking yet balanced discussions, this particular conversation missed the mark. The heated tension of Kleinstein's episode stands in stark contrast to the unrelenting skepticism of our next guest, Brian Dunning. 7. Brian Dunning, the skeptic who argued too much. When Brian Dunning, a science writer and skeptic, joined the Joe Rogan Experience, fans anticipated a lively discussion about conspiracy theories, critical thinking, and debunking pseudoscience. What they got instead was an episode that felt more like a prolonged argument than an enlightening conversation. From start to finish, Dunning and Rogan clashed on nearly every topic, creating an atmosphere of frustration that made the episode difficult to enjoy. The primary issue was Dunning's approach. As a skeptic, he was determined to challenge Rogan's views on various subjects, including UFOs, government conspiracies, and alternative medicine. While skepticism is often welcome on JRE, Dunning's manner came across as overly combative and dismissive. He frequently interrupted Rogan, cutting him off mid-sentence to present his counter-arguments. This not only disrupted the flow of the conversation, but also made it difficult for either party to fully articulate their points. Rogan, who thrives on open-minded discussions, seemed particularly annoyed by Dunning's rigid stance. The two butted heads repeatedly, with Rogan accusing Dunning of dismissing ideas without fully considering the evidence. Dunning, in turn, criticized Rogan for entertaining what he viewed as fringe theories. The result was a circular argument that went nowhere, leaving listeners frustrated by the lack of productive dialogue. One of the most notable moments came when Rogan brought up 9/11 conspiracy theories, a topic that has long divided skeptics and believers. When asked whether he thought there was any government involvement in the attacks, Dunning replied, "I would bet on no." While his skepticism was rooted in logic, his blunt delivery and refusal to entertain alternative perspectives further alienated the audience. The conversation quickly devolved into a back-and-forth argument that felt more like a debate club showdown than a meaningful exchange of ideas. Fans were quick to express their disappointment with the episode. While some appreciated Dunning's commitment to skepticism, Many felt his combative tone and unwillingness to engage constructively made the episode exhausting to watch. Rogan himself later admitted that inviting Dunning on the podcast was a mistake, acknowledging that their personalities and discussion styles clashed too much to create an enjoyable episode. The fallout from the episode was so significant that it was eventually removed from several platforms, making it one of the few JRE episodes to be effectively erased. While Dunning's skepticism brought a unique perspective to the podcast, his argumentative approach made his episode one of the most divisive in JRE history. From the heated intensity of Kleinstein to the unrelenting skepticism of Dunning, we now turn to a guest who brought an entirely different kind of energy to the show, one that was equal parts eccentric and baffling. Let's talk about Tom DeLonge. 8. Tom DeLonge, The Conspiracy Spiral. Tom DeLonge, best known as the guitarist for Blink-182, brought a different kind of chaos to the Joe Rogan Experience. Fans of the pop-punk icon were excited to hear about his transition from music to a self-proclaimed expert on UFOs and extraterrestrial life. However, what they got was an episode that left many scratching their heads in confusion. From the very beginning, DeLonge dove headfirst into conspiracy theories. He passionately described his belief in government cover-ups of alien encounters, secret military operations, and advanced extraterrestrial technologies. While Rogan is no stranger to entertaining fringe ideas, he found it challenging to keep up with DeLonge's frenetic energy and disjointed explanations. The conversation felt less like a discussion and more like an unfiltered monologue. What frustrated listeners the most was DeLonge's refusal to provide concrete evidence for his claims. When pressed by Rogan for details, he often deflected with vague statements like, "I can't get into specifics, but I know people who know." This lack of substance left Rogan visibly skeptical, and the audience grew increasingly frustrated with the lack of clarity. DeLonge's bold assertions, such as his claim that the US government has been reverse engineering alien spacecraft for decades, were fascinating on the surface but lacked the depth needed to make them credible. Adding to the confusion was DeLonge's tendency to jump from one topic to another without fully exploring any single idea. One moment he was discussing UFO sightings, and the next he was talking about secret meetings with high-ranking officials. The result was a conversation that felt scattered and difficult to follow. Even Rogan, who usually excels at guiding guests back on track, struggled to rein in DeLonge's tangents. Fans of JRE were quick to voice their disappointment. While some appreciated DeLonge's enthusiasm and willingness to tackle unconventional topics, many felt the episode was incoherent and frustrating to watch. Comments flooded social media, with viewers describing the episode as bonkers and a missed opportunity. For a guest with such a unique perspective, DeLonge's inability to articulate his ideas clearly left many wishing for more substance. Despite the criticism, DeLonge's episode remains a curious entry in JRE history, proof that even the most fascinating topics can falter without proper structure and evidence. From unsubstantiated conspiracies to outright awkwardness, the next guest on our list made their mark for all the wrong reasons. Let's dive into Eliza Schlesinger's infamous appearances. 9. Eliza Schlesinger, Jokes That Fell Flat. Eliza Schlesinger, a stand-up comedian and frequent guest on the Joe Rogan Experience, has had her fair share of memorable moments on the podcast. Unfortunately, not all of them have been for the right reasons. While Schlesinger is undoubtedly a talented performer, her appearances on JRE have been met with mixed reviews, with some fans praising her sharp wit and others cringing at her attempts to dominate the conversation. One of the most criticized aspects of Schlesinger's episodes is her tendency to self-promote. During her 2017 appearance, much of the discussion revolved around her then-new book, Girl Logic. While promoting a project is common for podcast guests, Schlesinger's approach felt forced to many listeners. Her repeated attempts to steer the conversation back to her book came across as unnatural, leaving fans frustrated by the lack of organic dialogue. The criticism didn't stop there. In subsequent appearances, Schlesinger's attempts at humor often fell flat. A particularly infamous moment occurred during a discussion about Bernie Sanders, when Rogan mentioned having the senator on the podcast. Schlesinger quipped, Okay, cool, I've had my mom on my podcast. You want to flex? Rogan's expression said it all. He wasn't amused, and neither were the listeners. The awkward silence that followed became a viral moment, with fans mocking the exchange as one of the most cringeworthy in JRE history. Another common critique of Schlesinger's appearances is her conversational style. She often interrupts Rogan or shifts the topic abruptly, which disrupts the natural flow of dialogue. While some fans appreciate her bold personality, others find it overbearing, particularly in contrast to Rogan's more measured approach. These dynamics have led to episodes that feel disjointed and at times exhausting to watch. Despite the backlash, Schlesinger has continued to appear on JRE, indicating that Rogan values her perspective and comedic insights. However, the mixed reception of her episodes highlights the challenges of balancing self-promotion, humor, and meaningful conversation on a platform as diverse as JRE. For a comedian who thrives on stage, translating that energy into a long-form podcast setting has proven to be a polarizing experience. From failed jokes to outright controversial behavior, the next guest on our list takes things to a whole new level. Ari Schaffer's antics on JRE have made him one of the most divisive figures to ever grace the podcast. Let's take a closer look. 10. Ari Schaffer, controversial antics and a divisive persona. Ari Schaffer, a comedian and longtime friend of Joe Rogan, has appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience numerous times, often stirring strong reactions from listeners. Known for his brash sense of humor and unapologetic personality, Schaffer is a divisive figure who thrives on pushing boundaries. While some fans enjoy his bold, no-holds-barred style, others find his behavior off-putting, with one particular episode standing out for all the wrong reasons. One of the most infamous moments came when Schaffer interrupted the flow of conversation by leaving the studio mid-episode to relieve himself. While the casual nature of JRE allows for unscripted moments, this action struck many as disrespectful, both to Rogan and the audience. Rogan's reaction was a mix of bemusement and mild annoyance, and while the incident was played off as a joke, it left a sour taste for many listeners who expected more professionalism. Schaffer's approach to humor has also drawn criticism. His tendency to make offensive or provocative jokes can alienate audiences who feel that he crosses the line between edgy comedy and outright disrespect. For instance, during one appearance, Schaffer made an offhand comment about a sensitive historical event, sparking outrage among both listeners and Rogan himself. While Schaffer argued that his remarks were intended as satire, many felt they lacked the nuance or context needed to be effective, instead coming across as needlessly inflammatory. The polarizing nature of Schaffer's episodes isn't just about his on-air antics, it's also about the persona he projects. Off-camera, those close to him, including Rogan, describe Schaffer as a thoughtful and kind individual. However, this side of him rarely comes across during his podcast appearances, where he leans heavily into his provocative alter ego. This disconnect between the person and the persona leaves many listeners unsure of how to interpret his behavior, further fueling the divide among fans. Despite the controversies, Schaffer remains a recurring guest on JRE, reflecting his close friendship with Rogan and his ability to generate lively, if contentious, discussions. For some, his appearances are a highlight, offering a raw and unpredictable energy that keeps the podcast interesting. For others, they represent the kind of guest who detracts from the thoughtful and engaging conversations that have made JRE so popular. In the end, Schaffer's episodes embody the chaotic spirit of the Joe Rogan Experience, unscripted, unfiltered, and often polarizing. While his antics might not resonate with everyone, they highlight the unique dynamic that makes JRE both compelling and unpredictable. As this countdown of the most hated guests on JRE comes to a close, Schaffer's divisive presence serves as a reminder that sometimes the line between entertainment and controversy is razor thin. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.